So Moscow was just hit again with a drone attack, and it wasn't as successful as the Ukrainians were hoping for. It looks like they were trying to strike the Ministry of Defense, and that those drones actually hit other buildings because they were diverted with electronic means. But I want to paint the bigger picture, and then we'll look at RT and how how Russian state media is developing this story. So here, I want you to see this first. That's what hit. That was the unsuccessful attack because of the electronic warfare means. Now, there's a direct line between the Crimean bridge, the Kerch bridge, and what happened here. After the Kerch bridge, there were, a lot of strikes from Russia as retaliatory strikes on Odesa and other things. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Let me just talk about this drone strike and what it looks like. Russia blames Ukraine for drone attacks in Moscow and Crimea. It's pretty clear that at least Ukraine was involved in some way. It's not like the original drone strike where we're like, wow, who could have done that? We know that they can get in at this point. We know that they can get very close to Moscow. So we're no longer in that mental space. Russia says it foiled the drone attack, and this is some footage of what it actually looked like. You won't see anything blow up, or you'll see the drone flying, and then you'll see the aftermath. So for YouTube, this is probably useful to see it this way. Yeah, that's what it looked like. But even if it didn't hit its target, it had a demoralizing effect. And the analogy that I would use is this: that it's like with every time that an authoritarian leader gets hit with something that shouldn't happen to an authoritarian leader, he loses an inch of stature. And Putin keeps losing these inches of stature all the way, like, okay, the Kerch Bridge or the Moskva or the Kerch Bridge 2 or what, I mean, each thing that happens, the drone strike in Moscow, everything that happens is another chink in the armor that's making him weaker, and he really can't tolerate that. So he's going to come out and have his surrogates come out and call it terrorism. And you'll see that. But I want to draw that line between the Kerch. After the Kerch Bridge, what happened, this is from Sky News. So after the Kerch, the Russians have been trying to just devastate Odesa. Now, part of that is they pulled out of the grain deal. Unrelated to the Kerch Bridge, they pulled out of the grain deal, and now they are destroying the grain storehouses and the ports and all that. Let's watch just for a couple minutes.
The worst of any attacks. It's away from the front line, and also for both Russia and Ukraine, it suited it whilst the grain was being exported. But of course, as you say, on Monday, the Russians pulled out of the grain deal, and ever since...
That language of terrorist attack is going to come up again and again and again, and I'll show you because I'm going to bring you to RT next.
He was found. We could see a road closure on a local traffic map earlier this morning, which seemed to be an area, really quite central area, close to the Ministry of Defense building. That road closure appears to have been lifted now. And separately in the southern part of the city, a building looks like it's been damaged, a non-residential building, according to the mayor of the city. Residents coming out, having a look, seems to have been fairly loud in some areas. Take a listen to what this one resident had to say.
I was asleep and was woken up by an explosion. Everything started to shake. It felt like the whole building had come down. I looked out of the window. I live in the neighboring building on the side where there's less damage, and it felt strange. The damage was so minor. Well, okay, not minor. Any explosion is scary, but it sounded worse than it looked, as it seemed like the whole mall had exploded. After that, I looked online and saw the amount of damage from this side, and we can't.
Okay, so that's what they're experiencing in Moscow. The war is actually coming to them with these drone attacks, and that is making, again, it's reducing Putin's stature with each attack. Let's look at what was said on RT. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did. I'll reduce the bell, the loudness of the bell, but every time you hear terrorist attack or a euphemist form, if they say it, referring to a terrorist attack, and then say it, I'll also ring the bell. But we'll just do that just to see how often they say this, because that's the theme.
An attempted Ukrainian terror attack in Moscow. Well, that's what the Russian Defense Ministry has said after drone fragments were found near the city center. The mayor said no one was injured in the strike.
On the morning of July 24th, an attempt by the Kyiv regime to carry out a terrorist attack with two unmanned and aerial vehicles against facilities on Moscow territory was foiled. 2 Ukrainian UAVs crashed after being suppressed by means of electronic warfare. There are no casualties following the foiled terrorist attack by the Kyiv regime.
Well, for more on this, let's cross live now to RT correspondent Umaima Isha, who is at the scene at the moment. Uma, good morning to you. Can you give us more details on the incident, please?
So, as the Russian officials have said, 2 Ukrainian UAVs were suppressed this morning in Moscow. Now, 2 of them fell in 2 different places. One of them fell quite close to the Russian Defense Ministry, and the second one...
Okay, and this is how you know it's not a terrorist attack, because they're actually going after a legitimate target. 9/11, we were sucker punched, but at least the Pentagon was a legitimate target where the trade center, I mean, like, okay, we're not at war, and if we are at war, that's a declaration of war. So I need you to understand that. But at least the Pentagon is a legitimate target. The World Trade Center, totally civilian, is nothing but terrorism. Like, you can't explain that as anything except terrorism. So in the same way, the Ministry of Defense here is a legitimate target. If it missed the Ministry of Defense because of the electronic intercept of knocking the drone off course, that's different. But this is not a terrorist attack by definition.
Fell in the location that we are at right now, but in the southwest of Moscow. But according to Russian officials, traffic is restricted, and as we can see it right now in the location. And the officials have also said to people to change their routes instead. But, this is not the first time that Ukraine has carried out terrorist attacks in Russia. We've seen terrorist attacks in Crimea. We've seen in St. Petersburg, in Moscow. Most notably, the one in Moscow was against the Kremlin in early May, where no one was injured. But let's take a little look at other terrorist attacks that Ukraine has carried out in Russia.
You're going to love this montage because you'll see. Okay, so journalist Tatarsky, I'm not sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can put it in the comments, that anybody connects him with Ukraine's government. I'm not sure who exactly was behind that. They're blaming Ukrainian intelligence, but it could have been the FSB or somebody else. I don't know. Now, this one, I don't think anybody was actually blaming anybody in the Western press, any Western reporters. And barely anyone has concluded that it was Ukraine behind this. In fact, the leading theory, if I understand it correctly, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this could have been a message for Dugin by FSB or some powers within Russia, but they're blaming Ukraine as if it is true. Making an assertion doesn't make something true. Okay, so you like that montage? There were 2 instances, and that was the montage. Like, they're not even good at this. Like, it's just amazing to watch.
Now, the Kremlin has accused the West of turning a blind eye when it comes to Ukrainian terrorist attacks, especially when we consider the latest one in Crimea, the deadly one in Crimea, where civilians were injured and dead. And the mayor of Moscow, when it comes to today's terrorist attack, he has said that there are no damages and that the drones have crashed into non-residential buildings after being suppressed by the Russian Defense Ministry. And of course, emergency services and police are on the scene monitoring the situation right now.
Well, Uma, thanks for breaking down that latest drone attack on Moscow. Thank you.
Okay, so that's what we see in RT, and that's going to be the narrative moving forward. But you can see the direct line between the Kerch all the way through the pounding of Odesa to, and by the way, they didn't say much about this on either CNN, which they said a little bit, or here, but Ukraine actually hit a target ammo dump in Crimea yesterday and today. So that's a big thing that's been kind of overlooked or in the shadow of this. Okay, I hope that provides context about what's going on with the Moscow drone attack. It's not a terrorist attack. It's a legitimate attack on an enemy in a time of war. And just because you call it a special military operation, in the same way that if I call myself a loaf of bread, I'm not a loaf of bread. All right, that's it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. If you want to help spread this message, please put it out on social media. Anything will do. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, it doesn't matter. Wherever you go, put it somewhere. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later.